The alert came through at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I was still in bed, half asleep, reaching for my phone to turn off my alarm when I saw it. A notification from my bank. A wire transfer. $284,000. Outgoing. From the joint trust account my grandfather had set up for me before he died. I sat up so fast I knocked my water glass off the nightstand. I thought it was a mistake. I thought someone had hacked the account. I called the bank before I even brushed my teeth, standing in my kitchen in socks, heart going way too fast. The customer service rep was calm in that way that made everything worse. She told me the transfer had gone through 2 days prior. She told me it had been authorized. She read me a name I hadn't heard used in an official capacity in over a year. My mother's name. I need to back up a little because none of this makes sense without the backstory. And I promise I'll keep it short because the backstory isn't really the point. The point is what I found out and what I did about it. My grandfather, my mom's dad, passed away 3 years ago. He was 79, sharp until the end, the kind of man who kept a legal pad on his kitchen table at all times and wrote things down before he forgot them. He was a retired civil engineer. He paid his taxes on time. He believed in documentation. Before he died, he set up a revocable living trust. He'd worked with an estate attorney in Phoenix where he lived, and he was meticulous about it. The trust had two main assets: his house, which he'd already sold and converted to cash, and a brokerage account he built over 30 years of careful, boring investing. Index funds, treasury bonds, nothing flashy, just discipline. He left everything to me, not to my mother, not to my younger brother. To me specifically because, and he told me this directly, sitting at that kitchen table with his legal pad, he didn't trust what would happen to the money otherwise. He loved my mother. He loved my brother, but he knew them. I was 28 when he died. I was 3 years into a job as a project coordinator for a mid-sized construction firm in Atlanta. I wasn't rich, but I was steady. He saw that. He wanted to make sure I had a foundation. The trust named me as the sole beneficiary. My mother was listed as the trustee, the person responsible for managing the assets until the formal distribution was complete. His attorney had recommended a co-trustee, an independent one, but my mother had pushed back on that. She said it was unnecessary. She said it was insulting. She said our family didn't need a stranger involved in our business. I was 28 and I didn't know enough to push back on that. The distribution was supposed to happen 18 months after his death, some legal holding period related to the estate. I didn't fully understand all of it, but the attorney had explained it clearly enough. The money was mine. It just needed to sit for a while, and my mother's job was simply to not touch it. 18 months came and went. My mother told me there were some tax issues, some paperwork the attorney needed to resolve. I believed her. She was my mother. She'd handled my grandfather's affairs his entire life. I had no reason to think she was doing anything other than what she said. Then the tax issues turned into another delay, then another. I'd stopped asking about it as aggressively because every time I brought it up, it turned into a conversation about how hard everything had been since my grandfather died, how much my mother had been carrying, how ungrateful it felt when I kept asking about money instead of checking in on how she was doing. I'm not proud of how long I let that work on me, but it did. By the time I saw that bank notification, it had been almost 3 years since my grandfather died. The distribution had never happened, and $284,000 had just been wired out of the trust to an account I didn't recognize. I called my mother after I hung up with the bank. She didn't answer. I called 3 more times. Nothing. I texted, nothing for 2 hours, and then, I'm at church, I'll call you later. She didn't call me later. I drove to her house that afternoon. She lives about 40 minutes from me, in a suburb north of Atlanta that she's always said she loves, but has been trying to move away from for as long as I can remember. My brother lives with her. He's 31. He works sometimes in a vague, inconsistent way that my mother has always covered for. I knocked. My brother answered. He looked surprised to see me. then immediately looked past me toward the driveway, like he was checking if I'd brought anyone with me. Is Mum home? I said. She's resting. I need to talk to her. He stepped slightly in front of the door. She's been having a rough week. I looked at him for a long moment. I've known my brother my entire life. I know what he looks like when he's uncomfortable because something is wrong versus when he's uncomfortable because he doesn't want to deal with something. This was the first kind. Tell her it's about Grandpa's trust, I said. He disappeared for a minute. Then my mother came to the door. She was wearing a cardigan and her reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she had the particular expression she gets when she's already decided how a conversation is going to go. Come in, she said. We sat in the living room. She offered me coffee. I said no. She made some for herself anyway, took her time with it, came back and settled into the armchair across from me like we were about to have a perfectly normal conversation. The bank called me, I said. There was a wire transfer, $244,000, 2 days ago, from Grandpa's trust account. I need to know where that money went. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Where did it go? There were expenses, she said. Estate expenses. Things that needed to be handled. I've been dealing with this for 3 years, and there are costs involved that you don't see because you're not the one managing everything. $284,000 in expenses. Don't use that tone with me. Mom, I kept my voice even. I had made a decision in the car on the way over that I was not going to yell, because yelling would give her something to react to and we would spend the next hour talking about my tone instead of the money. I need to see documentation, receipts, whatever the estate attorney provided to justify that transfer. There was a pause, a long one. The attorney and I agreed it was the most efficient way to handle the remaining estate obligations, she said. Which attorney? The one in Phoenix who set up the trust. We've been working with someone local. Something shifted in my chest right then. Not surprise exactly. More like the feeling of a suspicion you've been pushing down finally surfacing. What's the local attorney's name? She named someone I'd never heard of. I wrote it down. Mom, I'm going to ask you something and I need you to tell me the truth. Did that money go somewhere other than estate expenses? She set her mug down. She looked at me the way she's looked at me since I was a child, whenever she's decided I'm being dramatic. Your brother needed help, she said. He's been struggling. You know that? I've been worried about him for years and I had the means to help him, so I did. The room got very quiet. Grandpa's money, I said. You used Grandpa's money. It's family money. It's my money. He left it to me, in a trust, with your name as trustee, which means you were supposed to protect it, not give it to your son. You have a job. You're fine. Your brother. Where did it go? I said. Specifically, where did $284,000 go? She didn't answer immediately. I waited. He's been wanting to start fresh somewhere, she finally said. He found a business opportunity in Florida, and there were some debts that needed to be cleared up first. What kind of debts? She picked her mug back up, the kind families handle privately. My brother had been in the kitchen this whole time. I could hear him in there, not moving, not making noise, just standing there. I stood up. I'm going to need the name of that local attorney, I said. And I need the full transaction history on that trust account. If you don't provide it voluntarily, I'll get it through the bank. My mother looked up at me. You're going to make this into something ugly. It's already ugly, I said. I didn't make it that way. I drove home and sat in my car in my apartment parking lot for a while before I went inside. I called a friend of mine who'd gone to law school, not to ask for legal help, just to talk it through with someone who would understand what I was describing. She listened. Then she said very calmly, "You need an estate litigation attorney, not tomorrow, today." I found one the next morning, a woman who had been practicing estate law in Georgia for 17 years. Her office was in Midtown, third floor, plants on every surface. She had the kind of focused attention that made you feel like your problem was the only thing in the room. I brought everything I had: the original trust documents, the bank notification, the name my mother had given me of the local attorney, the limited records I'd been able to pull from the bank online. She went through all of it methodically, making notes, asking questions. Then she leaned back and told me what I was looking at. My mother's authority as trustee had specific, documented limits. She was permitted to manage the assets, meaning she could keep the brokerage account invested, pay any legitimate documented estate expenses, and handle administrative matters. She was not permitted to distribute trust funds to anyone other than the named beneficiary. She was not permitted to make gifts. She was not permitted to use trust funds to settle personal debts of her own or any other family members. What she had done was a breach of fiduciary duty, potentially a serious one. The local attorney my mother had named, my own attorney, looked him up while I was sitting there. He had a license, barely. One disciplinary action in the past 5 years for commingling client funds. Not the kind of person a careful trustee hires. The kind of person a trustee hires when they need someone who won't ask too many questions. Here's what I want to know, my attorney said. Is the $284,000 all of it, or is it part of it? I didn't know. I hadn't been able to see the full account history. We subpoenaed the records. It was not all of it. Over the previous 14 months, there had been smaller transfers, 12 of them, ranging from $8,000 to $31,000. Some were labeled with descriptions that vaguely referenced estate expenses. Most weren't labeled at all. Added to the $284,000 wire, the total that had left the trust was just over $390,000. The original value of the trust at the time of my grandfather's death had been $412,000. There was less than $22,000 left. I want to be honest about what that felt like, because I think people sometimes expect you to get very angry at a moment like that, and anger is part of it, yes. But more than anything, I felt something cold, like the floor had shifted. My grandfather had spent 30 years building that money. He had lived carefully. He had chosen me deliberately, and in the years since his death, while I was working and living my life and trusting that everything was being handled properly, almost all of it had been redirected to clear my brother's debts, to fund his fresh start in Florida, to whatever else my mother had decided on her own that the family needed. My attorney filed a formal complaint with the Georgia Secretary of State's office. She sent a demand letter to my mother and to the local attorney she'd used. The letter outlined the specific transactions, the specific violations, and the specific amount, $390, $241, and gave them 30 days to respond with a repayment plan or face civil litigation. She also referred the matter to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office for potential criminal charges. Misappropriation of trust funds in Georgia when the trustee acts with intent can be prosecuted as a felony. My mother called me 3 days after the letter arrived. She didn't call to apologize. She called to tell me that she was very hurt, that she couldn't believe I had gone to an attorney without talking to her first, that she had spent 3 years managing my grandfather's estate and this was the thanks she got. That she had only done what she did because she loved both of her children and it wasn't fair that I had been given everything and my brother had been given nothing. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I said, "You need to call your own attorney. I'm not in a position to discuss this with you directly anymore." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't understand why you're doing this." "Because it was my money," I said, "and you knew that." "I'm not going to tell you this has been easy. It hasn't. There's a version of this situation that I used to be able to pretend didn't exist. The version where my mother made a terrible mistake but was fundamentally on my side, where the family I grew up in was complicated but not dishonest. That version doesn't hold anymore. It broke the moment I saw what was left in that account. My brother called me once, about a week after the demand letter. He was in Florida by then. He said he hadn't known where the money came from. I didn't say anything to that. I don't know if it's true. It might be partially true, which is its own thing. The civil case is ongoing. My attorney is optimistic, though she's careful about what she promises. The question of criminal charges is still being evaluated by the DA's office. The local attorney my mother used is under a separate investigation by the state bar. What I do know, my mother's ability to make decisions about that trust is over. A court appointed administrator has stepped in to manage the remaining $22,000 and oversee any recovery of funds. The paper trail is thorough. My grandfather was meticulous, and that turned out to matter. People have asked me, since this became something I've talked about more openly, whether I think I'll get the money back. Honestly, I don't know. My mother doesn't have $390,000 sitting somewhere. My brother spent most of what he received. Recovery, if it happens, will probably be partial and slow. But that's not actually the part that stays with me most. The part that stays with me is a specific memory. The day my grandfather told me he was leaving everything to me. We were sitting at his kitchen table in Phoenix, late afternoon light, coming through the sliding glass door, his legal pad in front of him. He looked at me very directly and said, "I know this might cause some friction. I want you to understand that I've thought about this carefully and I'm not doing it to hurt anyone. I'm doing it because I believe you'll be responsible with it." He trusted me with something he'd spent his life building. And then he trusted the wrong person to protect it. I can't undo that part. But I can make sure every piece of this is documented, examined, and handled through the correct channels because that is what he would have done and because he deserved at least that much. I have a folder on my desk. It has the original trust documents, the subpoenaed bank records, my attorney's correspondence, the court filings, and in the very front, a copy of the legal pad page where my grandfather wrote down the terms of what he wanted. His handwriting was small and extremely neat. I look at it sometimes when the whole thing feels like too much. He believed in documentation. So do I now, more than ever. I keep coming back to something my grandfather said at that kitchen table in Phoenix. He looked at me and said he'd thought carefully about his decision, that it wasn't meant to hurt anyone, that he simply believed I'd be responsible with what he'd built. He wasn't wrong about me. But he couldn't have known what would happen after he was gone, because the person he trusted to protect his decision was the same person who quietly undid it, transfer by transfer, over 14 months. That's the part that's hard to sit with. Not the money, exactly, though $390,000 is not nothing, and I'm not going to pretend it doesn't matter. It's the deliberateness of it. This wasn't a moment of panic or one bad decision. It was a sustained choice made over and over again with forethought. My mother knew what the trust said. She had signed documents acknowledging her responsibilities as trustee, and she chose repeatedly to ignore all of it. I've thought a lot about what makes someone do that. I don't think she's a monster. I think she convinced herself, gradually, that she was making a reasonable call, that my brother needed the money more, that I was fine, that family should work things out internally, that what my grandfather had written down was less important than what she decided in the moment. And that kind of reasoning, the slow erosion of your own ethical standards justified by good intentions, is how most financial betrayals actually happen. Not dramatically, quietly. What I've learned from going through this is that knowing the right thing isn't enough. My grandfather knew the right thing. He documented it. He had an attorney draft it carefully. But knowing and doing are different, and the gap between them is where people get hurt. What saved me, what gave me any path forward at all, was refusing to stay in that gap. The moment I saw that bank notification, I could have waited. I could have given my mother the benefit of the doubt for another week, another month. I almost did. But something in me understood that waiting was just another form of letting it happen, and I had already let it happen long enough without realizing it. Going to an attorney wasn't comfortable. Sitting across from my mother in her living room wasn't comfortable. Watching her tell me I was making things ugly when she was the one who had spent over a year quietly emptying an account that wasn't hers. None of that was comfortable. But comfort was never actually an option. The only real choice was between doing nothing and doing something and doing nothing. had a cost I wasn't willing to pay. My grandfather kept a legal pad on his kitchen table because he believed that writing things down mattered, that clarity mattered, that a record of your intentions, made carefully and honestly, was worth something. He was right. His paper trail is what gave my attorney the foundation to build a case. His documentation is what made the subpoena meaningful. He believed in doing things properly even when no one was watching. And that belief, carried forward in a folder of trust documents, is still protecting me now. I don't know yet how much of the money I'll recover. But I know what I'm not willing to give up: the expectation that people who are trusted with something important should honor that trust, and if they don't, that there are consequences. My grandfather taught me that without ever saying it directly, he just lived it every day until the end.